Tanzania pledged to promote democratic governance in Africa.
Federal government to receive Nigerians fleeing from the war in Ukraine, in Romania and Hungary.
Presidency says new Electoral Act is proof of executive legislature harmony.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall discuss the Electoral Act 2022.
The Electoral Act Amendment Bill 2010 was rejected 5 times before it was eventually received assent by President Muhammadu Buhari. And thankfully, we now have the Electoral Act 2022 ahead of the 2023 general elections. Kinsley.
That's right, Jumai. Now, the signing of the Electoral Act Amendment Bill into law by President Muhammadu Buhari has continued to attract encomiums from political actors who describe the new law as a landmark and a win for democracy in the country, considering the back-and-forth controversies that trailed its eventual passage into law. Now, some persons have said that the new act may not, however, necessarily cure all the ills of our political process, but that it's certainly a step in the right direction.
A step in the right direction indeed, Kinsley. President Muhammadu Buhari has once again promised to leave a legacy of free, fair and credible election. And more than anything else, the new Electoral Act underscores government's commitment in that direction.
Now, some of the major provisions of the new Electoral Act include legal backing for the electronic transmission of election results. There's also provision for electronic voter accreditation, early conduct of party primaries, that's at least 180 days before the general elections, as well as the early start of campaigns, which is 150 days to election day. Now, there's also the prerogative of the Independent National Electoral Commission to review results, where it's discovered that such results have been declared under duress. And there is also financial independence for INEC, among other major highlights of the new Electoral Act.
Now, the new acts also read over voting election tribunals, accords priority and social inclusion for persons living with disability in the electoral process. And interestingly, the Act also addresses the misuse of appointed political office as platform and source of resources from which to campaign for elected political office.
Well, that was the concern the President raised at the signing ceremony last Friday with respect to Section 84, subsection 12 of the new Act, which forbids serving political appointees from being a voting delegate or being voted for at the convention or congress of any political party. Now, President Buhari's opinion was that this aspect of the Act is not in tune with the constitutional provisions and will ultimately not only disenfranchise serving political appointees, but compel them to resign before seeking elective posts.
Well, that sounds interesting, Kinsley. And indeed, in the words of presidential spokesperson Garba Shehu, he said, and I quote, "These are crucial changes to the law which will benefit voters, not parties, empower citizens, not politicians, and strengthen our democracy as part of President Buhari's legacy to our nation," end of quote.
That's right. Now, INEC is already taking action in consonance with the provisions of the Electoral Act by adjusting the date for the presidential and National Assembly elections, which will now take place on Saturday, February 25th, 2023, as against the earlier advertised date of February the 18th. Now, the governorship and state House of Assembly will now take place on the 11th of March next year. Is said to be in conformity with the provisions of the new law, and those provisions stipulate that election notice must be published at least 360 days to the elections.
So, what are the major highlights and implications of the Electoral Act 2022? We have a panel of guests on Good Morning Nigeria today to provide further insight. You're welcome to the program. I am Jumai Yusuf.
And I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I also join my colleague Jumai to welcome you to the program on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. In the course of it, we shall have our complementary segments. This will include newspaper review and business. For now, here is Informa Ojinta, who has the highlights of the morning news. Good morning, Informa.
Good morning, Kingsley and Jume. Here is the morning news. Vice President Yemi Osinbajo and his Tanzanian counterpart, Philip Isdor Mpango, are united in their views regarding a just energy transition as the global community moves towards a net zero emissions target and the need for greater international collaboration in deterring unconstitutional changes of government in Africa. These are some of the issues discussed by both leaders at a bilateral meeting in Arusha, Tanzania. Both vice presidents discussed a wide range of issues of interest to both Nigeria and Tanzania, including infrastructure development, trade and investment, technology, climate change, and democracy. Speaking about the need to promote democratic governance on the continent against the backdrop of recent coup d'etat in West Africa, the Vice President emphasized the need for other regional bodies on the continent and others in the global community to support actions already taken by ECOWAS leaders. On his part, Vice President Mpango commended West African leaders for their efforts to halt the menace of coup d'etat in the sub-region. The presidency describes President Buhari's assent to the Electoral Act 2022 as a proof of harmonious working relationship between the legislature and executive. Senior Special Assistant to the President on Media and Publicity, Garba Shehu, in a statement, emphasized that more than anything else, the law underscores government's commitment to ensuring free and fair elections and the dignity of the citizens. The law also provides for social empowerment and inclusion by limiting the influence of money in elections and raw power of incumbents to the disadvantage of opponents, while limiting electoral violence that works against the popular wish in a poll. Garba Shehu notes that the Electoral Act will address the misuse of appointed political office as a platform and source of resources to campaign for elected political office. The federal and state by-elections have been concluded and results out. In Jos North Bassa Federal Constituency, Musa Kaga Avi of the People's Democratic Party emerged winner, while Ezra Dakok of the APC for the Pangshin South State Constituency. APC candidate Mayokun Alade won the Akure North South Federal Constituency with 26,000 votes. Election for Ogoja Yala Federal Constituency in Cross River States, the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, announced Jude Ngaji of the APC as the winner. In Akpabuyo, Edet Ekeng Efyong of the PDP emerged winner with a total of 5,866 votes. In Ngopala State Constituency of Imo State, APC won the State Assembly seats with 9,248 votes. The federal government says there are arrangements on ground to receive fleeing Nigerians from Ukraine at all entry points in Romania. A statement by Nigerian embassy in Bucharest says contacts are available to assist Nigerians taking refuge in Romania. The consular officer can be reached on the phone numbers showing on your screen. Similar statement from Nigerian embassy in Budapest indicates that Nigerians entering Hungary from Ukraine can contact officials of on these numbers, saying arrangements to safely transport them have been concluded. The arrangement is in addition to those already put in place by the Romanian authorities to welcome evacuated, repatriated nationals of every citizen from Ukraine. Affected Nigerian nationals are advised to ensure they arrive at entry points with valid travel documents and cooperate with Romanian immigration officers at the borders. Meanwhile, Ukrainian and Russian officials will meet for talks at a venue on the Belarusian border, with Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky's office said on Sunday that both countries have agreed that the Ukrainian delegation would meet with the Russian delegation without preconditions on the Ukrainian-Belarusian border near the Pripyat River. Ukrainian president said the talks, the first since Russia unleashed a full-scale invasion of Ukraine last week, was the result of a phone call between him and the Belarusian president. And the presidency says the safety and human rights of some 4,000 Nigerian citizens, most of whom are students and many others from friendly African nations stranded in Ukraine, is paramount, even as efforts to begin talks between Russia and Ukraine are underway. A statement by the Senior Special Assistant to the President on Media and Publicity says the federal government understands the pain and fear of all who find themselves in this terrifying place, but expressed displeasure at video evidence and first-hand reports from those in contact with Nigerian consular officials about Ukrainian police and security personnel refusing to allow Nigerians to board buses and trains heading towards the Ukraine-Poland border. A widely circulated video on social media shows a Nigerian mother with her young baby being physically forced to give up her seat to another. The statement adds that there are also separate reports of Polish officials simply refusing Nigerian citizens entry into Poland from Ukraine. One group of Nigerian students who have been repeatedly refused entry into Poland has concluded to travel again across Ukraine and attempt to exit the country via the border with Hungary. The statement appreciates security officials in border management and impossible expectations they might be experiencing in a situation they never expected, but notes that it is paramount that everyone is treated with dignity and without favor, saying that all who flee this invasion have the same right to safe passage under unconvention, and the color of their passports or their skin should make no difference. And that's the morning news for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Kingsley and Jumai after this break.
You're watching Good Morning Nigeria on the NTA. It's now time for business news with Comfort Amadou.
The manufacturing sector in Nigeria is set to be focal to the achievement of economic development and growth. Recognizing the huge impact and viability of this sector, key players in the industry have harped on the need for government to reposition as well as revive ailing industries, with special attention on the print media, which can attract foreign direct investment to the country.
Papers that are being imported into this country alone per annum, we import over ₦1 trillion worth of paper, both with government and the private sectors.
Recognizing the huge impact and viability of this sector, key players in the industry have harped on the need for government to place the sector on the resource-based industrialization and invariably make Nigeria a competitive economy, with key attention on the print industry for growth and stability.
Maybe you have an invoice of, say, over $100,000 to fund, and then you have just 20,000 in 3 months. So how do you make us for the fruit different?
We'll leverage on innovation, we'll leverage on creativity, and we'll advance as the practice continue. So its advantage to Nigerian national development is it's so many.
Key players advocate local value addition to sustain the print industry in Nigeria, promotes local production of raw materials and reduction in cost of production.
Thank you very much, Comfort, for the business news package on Good Morning Nigeria. Up next is Newspaper Review.
Regular Our newspaper reviewer, Bayo Toby, is not available today, but let's take the papers and try as much as we can to analyze it. We'll begin with the Nation newspaper, and just above the masthead we have PDP ticket, Wike attacks ex-VP Atiku. With rider, outcome will be shocking. You find details on page 5. Gunmen kill 17, abduct 57 in Niger, Kaduna attacks. Details on page 2. PDP wins Plateau House of Reps by election. Details on page 3. And Benue Council Chiefs confirms death of 5 mourners. You find that on page 5. And below the masthead, we have new law prescribes 10 years jail for electoral offender. With rider, private security guards are banned. You find details on page 5. Banks in last minute scramble to submit audited report. You find details on page 4. Osun Primary, why Aregbesol's man's appeal was dismissed by APC panel. That is on page 5. And the headlines in the Nation newspaper, 2023 INEC polls timeline creates anxiety in APC PDP. With riders, ruling party leaders jittery. Progressive governors Buhari meet tomorrow. As today, 13 ministers Akpanododehe in Delima. Opposition party begins consultation. You find all the details on page 4. Romania, Poland, okay free passage to Nigerians to Ukraine. Putin, Zelensky for talks. You find the details on page 4. And the picture story you see there, refugees from Ukraine at the railway station in Poland yesterday. At the bottom plate of the Nation newspaper, Lassa fever, 21 killed in 1 week. Lassa fever, 21 killed in 1 week. Details on page 3. NURTW queries Lagos Chair MC Olomo. You find the details on page 2. Gisli?
Okay, let's also take a look at the front page of the Punch newspaper. And from above the name flag, you have the following headlines. Marketers compile losses on bad fuel to demand compensation. National Assembly snubs Southern governors, excludes state police from 68 amendments. APC governors meet Tuesday and party names convention panel. SANU lampoons federal government, threatens to ground universities. Federal government raked in 1.69 trillion naira company tax in 2021, and that's according to the Bureau of Statistics report. Reps set to publish audit queries as MDAs shun invitations. Now, the lead story comes with a kicker: Russia-Ukraine war. Fuel scarcity may persist. Oil vessels face delay on seas. Tanker freight rate, insurance premium climbed in 3 days. More vessels avoid Black and Mediterranean seas over attacks. And federal government directs fleeing Nigerians to head for Romania and Hungary. And you see composite photographs there of arrests and demonstrations against the ongoing war. Hoodlums invade Benue couple's burial, kill community leader and 8 mourners. And northern governors seek air peace and Kano Emir's reconciliation. NDLEA seizes cannabis packaged as black soup at Murtala Mohammed Airport. PDP alleges fraud as APC wins 3 reps seats. Abuja mob lynches man over motorcycle theft. Bandits storm Niger wedding, abduct bride, and kill 8 guests. Well, Juma, those are the headlines from the various pages, front pages of the 2 newspapers that we have. As often would be expected in a war situation, there is already a brewing humanitarian crisis
Yes.
in and around Ukraine. and particularly for Nigerians and other Africans who are seeking to flee the war in Ukraine. We just listened to our news bulletin talking about footage showing Nigerians who were being discriminated against.
Africans?
Yes, by Ukrainian officials, for them to board buses or trains to the nearest border exit. And you're going to ask yourself, what is all that in aid of? Everyone faces similar threats. The missiles or the ammo will not discriminate against Africans or against Ukrainian nationals. There's an unfolding humanitarian crisis, and when people are seeking safe passage to a safe haven, it's necessary that they all be accorded the same rights and dignity as the Nigerian statement already indicated. But besides that, I think that it's important that, fine, Nigerians take flight from Ukraine and they find themselves in Hungary and in Romania. What next?
Yeah, what next?
What next?
And I think Poland said they have only a grace of 15 days before they can, find their way to other countries. They can only give them accommodation for 15 days in Poland before they can proceed to other countries. Well, in a situation like this, everybody is in a state of confusion and they are all scared, especially, and most of these Africans are students.
That's right. They
are students, yes. Most of them living home, and to find themselves stranded in a foreign country without money, you can't access your credit card, you can't do anything. It's a very scary situation. And I think our foreign policy needs to be looked into to ensure that this does not happen to our citizens anywhere they find themselves in such a situation, don't you think?
I agree. I mean, but it's also important for the officials of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as Nigerians in diaspora commission, to ramp up the efforts to evacuate Nigerians where they have now found some temporary safe haven. We recall that last week the House of Reps had advised its ad hoc committee to liaise with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to see how they could urgently evacuate Nigerians from Ukraine. But obviously, that became practically impossible because Ukraine, as it were, is now a no-fly zone. And no airline, no pilot is going to take the risk of attempting to fly into Ukraine. So now there is some, as we said, temporary shelter for Nigerians in Romania and also in Hungary. And if Poland continues to admit them, we'll also find them in Poland. The next thing would be, if there is a grace period of 15 days, we should not allow Nigerians to spend up to 15 days before they get evacuated.
And there's a silver lining. There will be talks today between Russia and Ukraine.
Well, that's in terms of the conflict itself. Yes. We're talking about the humanitarian crisis affecting Nigerians.
There's a silver line, because if the talks is on the right footing and is positive, I think the crisis will not escalate further.
Well, we have also seen in recent days a reign of sanctions on Russia. Including sporting bans, air flight bans, as well as exclusion from the global financial system. I think SWIFT, they said they were going to exclude a number of leading Russian banks from that. Chelsea, Abramovich, that's the owner of Chelsea. Has also now been declared persona non grata in Britain, although that's not directly related to the conflict. They have alleged that he is corrupt, he's X, Y, Z, but he's owned Chelsea for so many years.
Yes.
So you have it, EU is saying they're going to arm Ukraine. The US is also seeking to arm Ukraine. NATO is seeking to arm Ukraine. And then you ask yourself, now, if all these weapons are getting into the hands of Ukraine and support is also coming in terms of material, what do you expect? Do you expect the talks to go on as you are hoping that the outcome will be positive? It means that each side will probably dig in, and then that means that there will be much greater conflict. Already, Russia has issued a warning to both Finland and Sweden with which it has common borders, to say, look, be careful how you handle these matters. And you know, all the arguments about the Monroe Doctrine, all those arguments are still flying around. But what we see now, again, I want to focus on the humanitarian crisis, is precisely what African conflict zones experience.
Yes.
When sometimes major powers or influence peddlers from outside of the continent come to Africa to come and foment crisis. You find it in the Congo. We have seen it in Sierra Leone when blood diamonds. We find it in Mali when Africans are fleeing from conflict, and then they look like, you know, they sometimes treated as if they were subhumans. This is precisely what happens.
What is happening now?
That's right.
That is what is happening. I have a nephew at the border. Since yesterday, they've not been able to cross into Poland, but we hope this morning they will be able to
cross. And when you look at the conditions, I mean, it's people just want to just be out of harm's way. It's winter still, so the weather is not comfortable. In those cramped conditions, you have to ask yourself, how do you eat? And then how do you use the convenience, assuming it is available? And with COVID and social, nobody, of course, is observing social distancing right now.
Nobody.
Because
that's
the thing
been thrown out the window.
Yes, is to just get out of the danger zone. And we do hope that those two neighbors, Ukraine and Russia, will find accommodation. Even though Russia is going to argue that if you continue to place it under sanctions, how do you expect it to function? Is the whole intention to obliterate Russia as a major power from the world, or what? Yes.
They want to turn into a pariah nation, actually. And let's look at the new laws that prescribes 10 years for jail time for electoral offenders. What do you think about that? And private securities and guards are banned.
Well, we're discussing the Electoral Act
today,
2022 in our conversation segment, so we might as well leave those provisions.
Out.
But the one point to make is that our challenge in Nigeria, as we have discovered, is not so much about the absence of laws and regulations. The rules are often there, but it is in obedience to the rules. That's to say, enforcement, or if it's a policy, implementation. So you can have all these rules, you can have all the prescriptions, and if the human behavior, scorns at those provisions, then we're going to have a major challenge. It is not as if we have not had electoral acts in the country. There have always been. You can't conduct an election without the rules of the game. And those rules of the game relate, of course, to the Electoral Act. And an Electoral Act is dynamic. That's to say, changing circumstances, changing situations to cure perceived mischief or actual mischief, and to also bring the law in line with judicial pronouncements. That's to say, whenever there is a judicial review of an earlier provision, what then do you do? So you have all of these provisions and so on and so forth. But if those who are supposed to play by the rules do not play by the rules, what happens? Yes, that's the other point, and this is very worrisome. You see the stories right here on the front pages. Over the weekend, the stories were also there on the social media. It says, hoodlums invade Benue couple's burial, kill community leader and 8 mourners. Then bandits storm Niger wedding, abduct bride, kill 8 guests. There was also the story in Anambra of
at a burial.
At a burial, there was a claim that the person who was being buried was a late leader of a cult group, the Ozo cult group, and the burial was taking place at a location called Ebenebe or so in Anambra, and the attackers stormed the venue, desecrated the dead body, and shot several other mourners to death. So you're going to ask yourself, ordinarily, a wedding ceremony or a burial ceremony are either moments of joy or very sober occasions, and suddenly you are having hoodlums and all kinds of unknown gunmen taking advantage of it. Are you now going to have a situation where, for you to have a wedding ceremony, for you to have a burial ceremony, then you will now have to employ a platoon of armed guards around you? Sometimes it just speaks to the level of degeneracy of our respect either for human life or even for the dead. All right. Now, the story by the Punch about fuel scarcity persisting, oil vessels face delay on seas. What we have to ask ourselves, what is happening? Oil prices around about 100.
Yeah, 100
there's no need for us to celebrate that because we do know what the impact is. Namely, because we import our refined petroleum products, it means the cost will also go up, and then the cost of subsidy will also go up. So, what can be done in terms of revamping our refineries?
Maiduguri yesterday, 250 naira for a dollar, for a liter of fuel in Maiduguri yesterday. So it's really, I spent 4 hours, 30 minutes trying to get fuel on Wednesday. I said I wasn't going to move an inch until I get the fuel because you're not really sure when you're going to get it again.
I don't know what explains the scarcity in Abuja itself. Now, in parts of the country, say Lagos, the fuel situation is not as arduous as you would find in Abuja. So, what is it that is happening in Abuja? Is it undersupply, or is it overpurchase, as persons are saying? So, what if
panic buying?
Or panic buying? If the fuel is available, why would anyone engage in panic buying? All right, Jumai, I think we have to draw the curtains on our newspaper review segment for today. It's Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. We'll take a short break now. When we return, of course, we'll be dealing with some of the key provisions of the Electoral Act 2022.
Background report on the topic.
The Electoral Amendment Bill became an act after Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari finally assented to it at the council chambers of the presidential villa, Abuja. It is believed that the new law would improve and clarify some anomalies in Nigeria's electoral process, entrenching transparency and reducing to the barest minimum incidences of acrimony from dissatisfied candidates and political parties. Some experts say that the new act will revolutionize elections in the country through the introduction of new technological innovations such as the electronic transmission of results. While signing the bill into law, President Buhari requested the National Assembly to consider immediate amendment of Section 84, subsection 12, to be in tune with the Constitution. That section of the new electoral law says no political appointees at any level shall be voting delegates or be voted for at the convention or congress of any political party for the purpose of the nomination of candidates for any election. This, the president emphasized, will constitute a disenfranchisement of serving political office holders from voting or being voted for at conventions or congresses of any political parties for the purpose of the nomination of candidates for any election in case where it holds earlier than 30 days to the national election. The Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, has readjusted the general election timetable, reaffirming and reassuring that the Commission will transmit the 2023 general election results electronically. The presidential and National Assembly elections will now hold on Saturday, February 25, 2023, as against February 18, earlier announced, while governorship and state houses of assembly elections holds on March 11, 2023. This adjustment is said to be in conformity with the provisions of the electoral law, which stipulates that election notice be published at least 360 days to the elections. Other highlights of the new Electoral Act includes Clause 29, subsection 1, which stipulates that parties must conduct primaries and submit their list of candidates at least 180 days before the general elections. Clause 65 gives INEC the prerogative to review results declared under duress. Clause 3, subsection 3 stipulates that funds for general elections must be released at least 1 year before the election, while Clause 54, subsection 2 makes provisions for people with disabilities and special needs. How effective will the new Electoral Act be towards ensuring free and fair elections in the country? Will the issue of ballot snatching and electoral malpractices now be a thing of past? What are the roles of the umpire and the people in implementing the new Electoral Acts? Guests on the program will give their perspectives in a moment.
Many thanks, Oyemi Ajayi, for that background. Now with us in the studios to discuss this, we'd like to welcome two of our regular guests. First, Dr. Chris Akomas, former Deputy Governor of Abia State. Your Excellency, pleasure to have you on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Also here with us in the studios is Dr. Sharif Gali Ibrahim, an Associate Professor and Head Department of Political Science and International Relations at the University of Abuja. Dr. Sharif Ibrahim, pleasure to have you this morning.
Always my pleasure to be here.
Okay. And Jumai, we have a third guest joining us via Zoom from Osogbo. That's the Osun State capital, Senator Shurajuddin Ajibola. Senator Ajibola is chair of the Senate Committee on Media. Distinguished Senator, pleasure to have you with us this morning.
Yeah, good morning.
All right, let's begin the conversation with you, distinguished Senator. The Electoral Act 2022 has been widely hailed by a number of political actors. From your point of view, and if you may, the point of view of the Senate, is this a game changer in our electoral politics?
I would say first and foremost why a lot of stakeholders applauded the Electoral Act 2022 is that it is a product of a wide consultation among the legislative arm, the executive, Independent National Electoral Commission, critical stakeholders in the governance sector in Nigeria, and some other developmental institutions. So it's a concerted effort to address some of the identified lacuna in the existing, the previous electoral acts. And these reforms are actually captured with intent to ensuring that we have free, fair, credible, and transparent election. Not only looking at the provision of the procedure for doing election, but also mechanism to ensure that INEC is able to prepare ahead in terms of the logistic demand of conducting election in over 200,000 polling units on the same day. And that is why there is provision to ensure that funds for the purpose of election are released at least 1 year before the election. Then some of the challenges that the Electoral Act has had, the previous Electoral Act in the area of judicial interpretation were also addressed. You will know that one of the prerogatives of the National Assembly is to ensure that we make reform of the law, either to address mischief under the existing law or to ensure that appropriate legislative reaction is made to judicial determination. For instance, I will mention some of them. In the area of the use of smart card reader, which have been identified as salutary in terms of ensuring proper identification and verification of voters, which is sine qua non to having credible election. The card reader was introduced by a guideline, and of course the Supreme Court in Wike and Pista side was of the opinion that non-compliance with the use of card reader will not amount to non-compliance with the Electoral Act. This will no longer be the case because under the new Electoral Act 2022, smart card reader and any other technological device to be used for the purpose of identification and verification of voters is now recognized. So beyond the existing technological instrument, any further advancement will also be recognized. Another salutary area is in the area of grants for election petition. You will discover that many elections properly conducted were challenged by some, I wouldn't want to use a non-existing political party or special purpose political party. And in those elections will be nullified on the ground of exclusion of their candidate. As of today, the Electoral Act 2022 has made a fundamental change to the grounds of election petition. You cannot challenge election on the basis of exclusion of your candidates because ample provision have been provided in the Electoral Act to ensure that you will be able to know and object if your logo is not going to be featured on the ballot paper. So that's a monumental loss to the country of having to reconduct election on the grounds of exclusion of candidates have been taken care of. Another very important provision has to do with the recognition of transmission or transfer of election result. Immediately results have been announced at the polling unit. And this, I believe, will assist in ensuring that seamless collation and timely collation of election results will also be taken care of. And of course, in terms of voter registration, you also see recognition of the right of physically challenged people by ensuring that there is proper aggregation of the register of voters to ensure that the interest of the physically challenged is also taken care of in the context of our electoral system. But overall, there is a difference between making the law. There's a lot of difference in imbibing the spirit and culture of democracy and ensuring credible elections. So for us as political actors, we also have the responsibilities to ensure that we abide by the rule, and the electorate also have to be properly enlightened to ensure that the franchise that they have is sine qua non to ensuring they participate actively in ensuring credible and genuine leadership for our country.
Senator, I'm still going to stay with you briefly. Like you said, we have to commend stakeholders, civil society, and Nigerians for consistently demanding for an electoral act that will guide our democracy. And the innovation of technology is here to stay, as we can see. But what we're discussing before the program started with Kingsley is all about implementation. How will this impact democracy? You talked about enlightening the electorate. How do we go about doing that?
I think the role of enlightenment of the electorate is multifaceted. Us, our politicians, we have responsibility to enlighten our constituents. The government, through the national orientation agencies and the Ministry of Information and the media, also have the role in enlightening the society. Similarly, also the civil society organizations and all other organizations interested in the advancement of democracy. But beyond issue of enlightenment, I must say that we must begin to imbibe culture of democratic aspirations and giving legitimacy to democratic institutions. In this regard, INEC itself has to bolster its confidence in its logistic preparedness for election. A situation whereby the members of the public don't have confidence that the logistic demand will be met in a way to ensure that they have seamless and painless interaction with the electoral process will dissuade them. One of the areas we need to begin to address beyond the law is the area of voters' inducement to ensure that the will of the people is not induced by monetary inducement and any other form of inducement. We also need to address security of our election to ensure that we don't also engage in too much security that will scare possible potential voters away. Election should be seen as a peaceful exercise and not turned to an atmosphere of war. But I also believe that one of the salutary provisions under the electoral law is to now properly streamline the process of emergence of candidates. Clearly, what will constitute direct primary, primary, indirect primary, and consensus are now clearly spread out. And there is ample time to ensure that elections are conducted and primaries are conducted such that pre-election matters could be determined before the proper election. A situation whereby even candidates as well as electorate are not even sure of who they are voting for will not augur well for democratic advancement of our people.
All right, Senator Ajibola, we still want to take advantage of the clear Zoom connection that we have with you right now from Oshobo before we bring in our two guests here in the Abuja studios. Now, the president, while giving his accent to the Electoral Act bill, did so with some, if you like, hesitation or reservation, even though our constitution doesn't provide any such room for ambivalence. You assent or you withhold your accent. But he did say, drawing attention to the contentious provision in his view, Section 84, subsection 12, which seeks to exclude political appointees from participation either in conventions or congresses. And we cross-referenced that to the pre-existing provisions of the Constitution, calling for an immediate amendment to that provision in the new act. Now, tell us, distinguished Senator, what was the wisdom in the lawmakers inserting that provision in the new act?
Yes, for you to make a provision of a law, you must be looking at what mischief is looked at. There are two aspects to subsection 12 or section 84. One is that when you are a political appointee, you cannot be a voting delegate in a primary for which candidate of your party will emerge. And I will tell you the mischief that address. It will mean that if you allow political appointee to be voting delegates to vote for candidates, for aspirants to become candidates of their political party, it will mean that the executive, who have a large latitude to make appointment for appointee, could as well make appointments solely and for the purpose of ensuring of conferring the right of delegates on such appointee. It will mean that if, for instance, the president is aware that the statutory delegates and also the other delegates elected through the instrumentality of the Congress of the party would not do his bidding, then he may as well appoint several and countless special advisors to vote at the election of the party. This, I believe, will not augur well for our democracy. The other aspect has to do with those appointees being able to contest while they are still holding employment. In this, I may seem to agree with the president that extant law appear to say that the only qualification that is required are the provision of the Constitution, and there are authorities like Shinkafi and Yari. The National Assembly is already discussing as to looking at the two aspects of Section 84, subsection 12, but it is not the case that the entire provision of Section 84, subsection 12 is not in line with the Constitution. The aspect that precludes the appointee of the executive from voting at convention is clearly within the mandate of the National Assembly to make a law. Then the one that we may examine when we resume and that we receive a communication to that effect from the president is that of whether it will be necessary for such appointee to resign in view of the requirement of 30 days prescribed in the Constitution. But the entire provision was actually intended to ensure there is no overbearing influence of the executive, and particularly in ensuring that there is free, fair, transparent, and credible nomination process in our political party.
Okay, thank you, distinguished Senator. Let's return to the studio where Dr. Chris Akumas is the former Deputy Governor of Abia State is seated. President Buhari described the Electoral Act in his letter to the National Assembly as reformative and progressive at the same time. And it's an indication that Nigerians as a people could, push for more reforms in any sector of the country, and we speak at one voice. What's your take on the president saying it's reformative and progressive at the same time?
Thank you, Jumai. I want to first commend Mr. President for assenting to the bill. And today we have Electoral Act 2022. I also want to commend especially the National Assembly for the speed with which they looked at the initial complaints of Mr. President and returned the bill in good time. We must give credence to the efforts of all Nigerians, because this is one bill that attracted so much interest. The civil society, INEC worked tirelessly, everybody. It shows the level of awareness. You know, as we go on, people are becoming more aware of things that ought to be taken care of and that makes for credible, and that we make for credible elections. Yes, it is reformative and also innovative. The point here is that looking at this Electoral Act 2022, you will see, observe, and recognize that there has been a lot of commitment on the parts of all stakeholders, a lot of selflessness, not being self-serving. And that is why today we are all hailing the assent and the Electoral Act. A number of things that has to do with the use of technology. A number of things that have to do with the way we do things. The prescriptions of the law that is more punchy and pungent, not like the previous laws where somebody will commit a crime and the consequence prescribed will be so minute that people will think is... would it mean that all our electoral problems, all the problems and challenges that has to do with conduct of elections have been taken care of? No. But it means that we are moving forward. It's a step, forward. And we have to make it work. It is one thing to prescribe what ought to be or what should be done. It's another thing to decide and be determined to make it work. Both the electorate, the political parties, the politicians, and those in authorities, the government. Looking at some of the issues raised by people over certain provisions, this issue of security and then the banning of private guards and private security. It means that the statutory security systems and architecture of the nation must be up and doing. They should be able to live up to expectation, because it's when people feel threatened and they feel that they don't have that protection, they don't have the confidence that these people will give them, then they look for alternative means of protection, because what is the contest? What are you going for if life is not there? So, both for the candidate, or the aspirant, the candidate, and the electorate. So, in that area, the Nigerian police, who are the lead agency in this, in elections, must begin to do a whole lot of work, re-strategize, so that they can give confidence. Talking about Section 84, subsection 12, and all that, the senator Ajibola was apt in his destiny. So I have watched and seen things like that, you will recall in previous discussions in this studio where we talked about some governors appointing over 1,000 aides, and if you are going to have, say, delegates of about 3,000, or even if it's 5,000, that comprises members, and then from the executive, you have over 1,000 already, the result of the election, you can, imagine. So it's important, and that is another area I really give kudos to Mr. President, because it takes political will as an executive. It takes selflessness to assent to that. The good thing also that I personally, when he assented and made that request that the National Assembly should look at Section 8(4) subsection 12, was that this is good for us, because ordinarily, the way things used to be, that would have been another excuse to send the bill back. But then he took the same approach that was taken on the PIA, the Petroleum Industry Act. You know that no law is perfect. But these people have done a lot of work, and they have captured majority of the aspirations of Nigerians. And it was good that the assent was given. We have the law now. We have to do the work. We have to walk the talk. And I commend INEC for their immediate response. As soon as that assent was given, they went to work, and they came up with the revised timelines and timetables for the elections. So, which is good. Now, the problem that we've had over the years is not just that we don't have laws or regulations. It's that aspect of agreeing to abide by it. Some people, as this Electoral Act 2022 is on now, their work is to place it, and they'll be looking at various sections. Side by side, they'll be making notes on how to evade those sections. My appeal to all of us, electorates, politicians, the executive, and then the umpire, is to be ready to ensure that for us to get effective and efficient result out of this act that we are all happy with, we are having, we must collaborate, we must cooperate, we must support the INEC, that's on one side. And on the other side, we must ensure personal responsibility as citizens to do that which we ought to do. And as politicians and citizens, we must work towards integrity. It's not just by saying it. Let us walk it. Let us not just talk about it. Because when we bring integrity and character into what we are doing, it will now result to the kind of things we are looking at. People will always try to induce and to buy. But who wants to go to jail for 10 years or more? But if somebody is willing, both on the side of those that will try to induce and those that want to buy, then those that want to sell their franchise, so be it. It's not that everybody may be caught at the same time, but some people will be caught, and then they will serve as an example. At a time, people thought that nothing can happen when somebody, a returning officer, makes a pronouncement as something happened. You saw what happened with the case that was propelled by Igini.
Yes.
And somebody, a professor, you know, nobody wants to go that way. So let us all work together, cooperate. Above all, I thank God for this act, and I commend all those that worked towards making it a reality.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Chris Akomas. Dr. Sharif Gali Ibrahim, let's have your own thoughts on the new Electoral Act 2022.
Well, thank you. As we have heard from Doctor here as well as the Senator, it is really progressive, reformative, as you said, and in addition, revolutionary, expecting the act to revolutionize the electoral processes of the country. And by and large, you know, one major issue that I must actually bring to the fore is the issue first discussed by the Senator, the issue of Section 84(12), which Doctor also itemized. Looking at the variation, you know, within that particular section, i.e., the public office holders or political appointees are not eligible to actually determine a kind of the candidacy or candidature of an aspirant, either to vote or serve as a delegate, as well as be voted for, you know, in the course of, you know, convention and determination of political aspirant. So he made mention of the move to actually put a stoppage to political influence. You know, the doctor made mention of imagine the executive appointing, you know, hundreds of political aides, you know, in order to serve him, and allowing such class of people to participate, you know, the convention in order to serve as delegate will actually make a greater influence on who actually emerges. But the second issue is, what worries Mr. President is the disenfranchisement, you know, of a particular set of people within the polity, that is the political appointees, because that particular section also says that they cannot be voted for, because they cannot participate to vote, you know, for delegates, as well as they cannot be voted for. So what worries Mr. President here is that he is appealing to the members of the National Assembly to even delete that particular section to make some amendment, you know, with regard to that. So I believe that if this particular section stops at not a political appointee determining a political aspirant at a convention as delegate, I think that would have been better. But now you are expanding it to disenfranchise these particular people. I remember, among these political appointees, there might be good candidates, better candidates, because they have been tested, you know, as political appointees. They have held various political positions, not necessarily in that particular political dispensation. So for you to make a political blockade, for them not to actually stand to be voted for, I think Mr. President is actually right. That's a clear disenfranchisement. Then on the other issue is the issue of, direct, indirect, and consensus, i.e. going back to the primaries. You know, democracy is a complex process because the majority will is always expected to actually thrive and succeed. The issue of these indirect elections as well as consensus, I think I have problem with this particular tool, because while making laws, the first thing you need to do is to critically look at the political structuration, the nature of the polity, you know, the political culture of the people, as well as those who are the kingmakers who determine the political processes of that an entity. What am I saying here is that if you allow for consensus, remember our political parties are also problematic. You say consensus, and we have 2, 3, 4, 5 candidates, okay? The political party might decide to choose a candidate among these, and not necessarily these members agreeing, but they can actually buy their mandate in order to bring in the candidate the political party want. So that is a problem here if this actually happens. Then the indirect also, it's like we're going back to square one, the indirect elections, you know, the delegate issues, which politically and culturally we know that delegates are being bought, you know, in our own political processes. The candidate who is supposed to be there, the people's choice will not be given that particular chance. Why? Because he's either not having the resources to buy delegates, or in one way or the other, the political party might even sabotage the whole process for him to emerge. Why? Because he is simply the best candidate there. So these two issues, Mr. President, you know, has made his own calculations and the advice he received from his own advisors. But I believe, as a political scientist, the direct election, you know, is best and will continue to be best for Nigeria and Nigerians. Why? Because Nigerians believe that the political process is not in their favor. So therefore, the only way for them to have a participatory democracy is when they are allowed to directly make that particular choice, i.e. between the people and the political aspirant. Members of the political party, you know, will actually go to their ward, the polling unit, and determine who should represent them. It's no longer a delegate, it's no longer the political party decision, but the decision of the people. Remember, the party is an umbrella, having so many members under it, so therefore you allow the members to have a say, to participate, and determine who should be there. So I think advisors have given advice, Mr. President has consented. Just like what Doctor said, there is no perfect law, but we'll continue to observe and see what's going to actually unfold and transpire in the nearest future. Then another issue is that the issue of having electoral offenders, you know, go to jail for 10 years. I think this is also revolutionary, you know, as it relates to this particular Electoral Act. Why? Because what brings about political backwardness in our society is impunity. You know, you see the politicians parading to court. In fact, when arrested, they will not even allow him to go there, to get to where he will be locked up before he get to the court. They try to bail him even outside the court. So therefore, this punitive measure, if really exercised and implemented, it is going to bring sanity within the polity. That is one major issue. I'm beginning to sympathize with INEC. Why? Because the yearnings and aspirations of Nigerians give us direct primaries, and Mr. President has suggested this particular tripartite areas, that is direct, indirect consensus. The National Assembly have made their own contribution, Mr. President, and Nigerians. The issue of election technology is also there. But we've had several times, INEC will tell you that we are 99% or 100% prepared. We've seen that in a number of elections. We've seen that in the FCT area councils elections. And finally, you see that the beavers, you know, are not working in so many polling units. So I implore INEC not to actually accept these particular weaknesses and loopholes of technology. They should effectivize these particular technological processes. That is, to be prepared. Make sure that these things are well tested before deployment into this particular polling unit. And make sure that replacements are there available, so that in case of failure, remember during the Anambra elections, the current Minister of Labor was there but was not able to be recognized even by the machine. So these are some of the issues. And ultimately, you see that in the recent concluded area council elections, the electorates, you know, were there, but the INEC officials were not there. And INEC said that it had provided effective transportation system, motorcycles, boats, you know, in case of riverine areas, but still why these people are coming late, you know, when people have been waiting. And you discover that in the whole process, INEC has a lot of duty and responsibility to discharge, because all other institutions have actually done their own best. So now INEC is expected to fulfill and make sure that it does not fail Nigerians as well as these particular institutions in order to avoid interinstitutional bellicosity.
Okay, Dr. Sharif, thank you very much for your elaborate comments on the new Electoral Act. But Jumai, while he was speaking, he said that, you know, a political party is an umbrella.
Yes.
I'm sure people are going to be wondering, umbrella.
Which umbrella?
A political party.
I actually wanted to...
They'll be wondering which umbrella are you talking about now?
A political party is also
platform.
A political party is also a broom. It's also a cockerel. It's also all kinds of things. But we appreciate what you have said. Of course, there are many perspectives to the Electoral Act. I'm just Senator Ajibola. Let's bring you one more time into the conversation. Well, there is an issue that the law has also tried to address, because we saw that in the 2019 general elections, where a gun was put to the head of a returning officer to declare a result. Now, the provision of the Act indicates that INEC has the discretion as to what to do where it considers that a result has been returned under duress. Discretion is often a wild horse, as you very well know. Are the lawmakers cognizant of this, or were they cognizant of this in inserting that provision into the new law? Senator Ajibola.
Yes, with respect, you see, we need to be careful when we use a cliché to say that our discretion is unruly us. It will practically be impossible for you to make law without vesting administrative discretion in administrative bodies to exercise. The legislation is prior authorization, and you cannot envisage all the manner of circumstances in real life that may occur. But the language of the Electoral Act 2022 on the issue you refer to is very clear. What constitutes duress has actually assumed a dimension that the meaning of duress in law has been given judicial imprimatur and is clearly done. So if the bill, the law, now not the bill again, has said that when an election result is declared under duress, I think it is not really vesting discretion. It has stipulated what will be the requirement for you to be able to exercise that power. And I think it's very clear that what is duress is actually duress. Then, of course, if an election is cancelled whimsically, there's still opportunity, there's still a window for anybody that feel that that power has not come within the provision of the law to challenge it at election petition tribunal. Then the other aspect of what we must be talking about is actually the bill on the Electoral Offences Commission, which I think will complement what we have in the Electoral Act. It's not just enough to prohibit certain action. There must be prosecutorial power and the will to prosecute such offenses. It will appear that in many instances, we will see people get arrested either on the eve of the election or on the day of election. Then, immediately after the election, the whole case may get disappear. I must commend INEC for pursuing to the logical conclusion the case of the academician that was found to be wanting in terms of participation in the election. So I think we need to strengthen the procedural power of our law enforcement agent and ensure that electoral offenses is not allowed to get just be treated with a pat on the back of the whoever will be the offender.
Jume, I'm sorry. Senator Ajibola, while you are on the issue of Electoral Offences Commission and the whole idea about diligent prosecution, could you just remind us what some of the critical provisions are in the Electoral Offences Commission or tribunal, as the case may well be, depending on when it comes out, relating to the whole idea of diligent prosecution? Because Dr. Sharif himself made reference to it. In the past, you find that from the point of arrest and prosecution and even trial, sometimes there are issues. There are a great deal of political interference. Will the Electoral Offences Commission recognize electoral offences as federal offences or as state offences?
I think the problem with Nigerian criminal justice system is not really about whether an offense is federal or state. In fact, if there's an area that the Constitution recognizes active collaboration between the federal and state level in the area of criminal law, but the challenge we have is actually the fact that our criminal justice system, the bulk of the work in that system is done through the magistracy system. Our magistracy system, with respect, which is within the province of the state authority, are generally not encouraged to be able to discharge their responsibility. You cannot continue to overburden the state high court for such offenses. So I think what we need to do is also to ensure that the commission, when it comes into being, should have able, competent, and diligent prosecutors to be able to do so. From my experience, particularly having served as an Attorney General in my state, is that most often prosecutors think that it is by putting so many offenses, so many counts on the information sheet or the charge sheet that you'll be able to ensure that you do justice. If the fact will be able to grant one or two offenses, why do you go and charge somebody for 100 offenses and then you have the consequences of a very long drawn trial, possibility of technicality coming in, the question of challenge as to the quality and the probative value of the evidence. So I think there's a need for us to also strengthen the prosecutors in the electoral offenses, as well as generally in our criminal adjudicatory system in the country. At times I wonder, when you begin to read charge sheets from morning till night in respect of an offense, and you know that for each of the offenses, you must prove beyond reasonable doubts.
Okay, Senator, I'm still going to stay with you briefly. Our discussants in the studios have consistently raised the issue of INEC and the role it needs to play in elections. And one of the 10 inclusions to the Electoral Act is the independence, financial independence of INEC, of which INECs have consistently, said that they are not independent, and that is the reason why we have problems at times during elections. So, talking about financial independence, how independent will financially would INEC be based on the Electoral Act and the new constitution?
I think there are, I will not say that even previously that INEC is not independent in terms of its finances. The issue is not about independence. It's about the timeliness of consideration and release of funds to INEC. And in this regard, the Electoral Act 2022 has made it clear that funds for the purpose of election will be appropriated and released to INEC at least 1 year before the election. I think this will address the question of the lateness in being able to receive the necessary funding. But I would say in a democracy, there's notwithstanding the nomenclature, independence in the name of INEC, no arm of government, not even the executive, nor the legislature or any other agencies, is totally insulated as an independent island. This is because the demands of balance, separation of power also require checks and balances. For instance, even INEC will get its fund. It must also not be insulated from ensuring that the funds are used in an efficient manner and in a way that is not aiding or abetting corruption. So to that extent, the National Assembly, being the body that appropriates money for the INEC, will still have the power to oversight for the purpose of determining use and efficiency of the use of the money and ensuring that the money are not just filtered away. At the same time, too, there must also be scrutiny as to what is submitted for the purpose of even appropriation. INEC cannot just on its own write its own budget, approve its own budget, and then utilize it in a way that would not be amenable to oversight and function. I think the real challenge is to ensure that INEC plan ahead and ensure that logistic nightmare like the one we had that led to the postponement of the 2019 general election will not happen again. And of course, there will also be a need between now and February 25, 2023 for INEC to test run some of its technological device, because it's a one-day affair from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. and you must ensure seamless utilization and operation of those gadgets. So there's nothing wrong in having dry run in ahead of the election to ensure that voters are not scared away because of logistic nightmare that may be occasioned by lack of proper preparedness. So it's not just about money, it's about holistic auditing of the processes, systems, and logistical requirements that is required by INEC for the purpose of the election.
All right.
Okay.
Senator Ajibola, thank you very much. But we'll still pause you and then return to our guest in the studio. Gentlemen, I was just wondering, while we're talking about Section 84, subsection 12, which you have deliberated on, namely restraining the executive or political appointees from participation in conventions or primaries and so on and so forth. I think that a historian of our electoral rules process will, of course, recognize that political parties, particularly in the Fourth Republic, have always grappled with this. If you recall, the People's Democratic Party had to be changing its constitution from time to time regarding those who were so-called automatic delegates at its conventions. If you were a political appointee, for instance, at some point you could be an automatic delegate, whether you were a minister, you were a commissioner, you were a special advisor, and so on and so forth. So now this is being codified, and I think that is pretty important. However, they're able to sort that out. But before we move into another area of the Electoral Act 2022, we'll take a short break now. All right, you're welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Dr. Chris Akumas, let's talk about one aspect of the new Electoral Act, that's 2022. The President earlier had declined the accent on account of what he found to be problematic with the prescription of the previous bill for parties to conduct only direct primaries for the choice of their candidates for elections. Now we have provisions for direct or indirect or consensus. Direct and indirect are fairly clear, but some are arguing already that the provision for consensus is a chink in the Electoral Act that could be exploited by the party oligarchs to continue with the imposition of candidates, and therefore, raising up the entire issues all over again of lack of internal party democracy. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Kingsley. Let me start by saying the president did well, because that aspect, as it were, until this comprehensive inclusion of the three options, was actually in conflict, because the parties are allowed to, determine the choice or the type of option that will best suit them. If you want to look at it properly, consensus has to do with maturity. It has to do with unity. It has to do with understanding. It has to do with respect for one another. I want to give you an example. Some years back in my state, Abia, we were going to conduct primaries for local government elections. And one particular local government had so many candidates, and the candidates, all of them were, So when it got to a point, the elders in that local government invited them to a meeting, locked them up, and said, when you decide on one of you going, you tell us. We are waiting outside. It solved the problem because they had to discuss. Consensus requires understanding. It requires respect and recognition for each other. That's on that side. And most times, when consensus is taken and somebody is, decided upon, the bickering is usually less. Two, indirect everybody is complaining indirect. The same thing about indirect is also applicable to direct, because I've had both experiences. Who are the midwives and who are the people that operationalize this? The party officials, the bigwigs of the system. So you say indirect because it's by delegate, okay? A number of people will be elected as delegates, and then they come up and maybe they'll be quarantined somewhere, and when it's time, they file out and vote. Direct also, that has to do with the party register. Which party in this country has very verifiable, trusted register when people are moving every day from one party to another? The ones you are seeing is at the higher level. What of the small ones moving up and down? This person is in this party today, tomorrow is on another one. And then the register of the party in that ward, who is responsible for it? Who handles it? We are moving forward. No system is, like I said, is perfect. We still have room for improvement. It is better that we have the three options. Whichever works and helps the party, A, to avoid violence, B, to ensure cohesion, C, to be able to strategize, because the purpose is to win. It's just the vehicle to get the power. The one that helps the party and they understand themselves, so let it be, as long as it's not in conflict with the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, 1999, as amended. So also, this issue of political appointees, I think the area, like you say, which I actually agree with Prof. and the distinguished senator, is that, the conflict between 30 days to resign and now 180 days, I suppose, whichever, if there is clause there, if the primaries we hold before 30 days. So if the primaries we hold within 30 days, is still applicable. However, there are statutory delegates, Kingsley, that is what is called. Statutory delegates are those that have been elected before or that are occupying elective offices. These are statutory delegates. For me, I think the difference will be that where there would have been a bogus figure of, say, X thousand, there may be X hundred. The result will still aggregate to the same thing.
Yeah, yes.
So I believe that these are workings that INEC and everybody, that was why I talked about collaboration, cooperation, and support. So it is important. Let us, no matter what we say, we thank God for the act. It's an act now. We moved from bill to an act. It is still work in progress. How we should thank God also that there are off-season elections to test and try out all this. And then going forward, I'm sure no one, not indirect, not consensus, not direct, is perfect.
Okay, Your Excellency, thank you very much. I think what is clear now from the provisions of the law, primaries must hold at least 6 months before the election, and campaigns would begin 5 months before the election, which is also a good thing, although the issue of handbills and posters and billboards, while you are still an aspirant, whether that one will amount to a campaign, it's an open question. Senator Ajibola, just before we let you go, I would like you to restate again for the benefit of our viewers the contentious issue we've always had where busybody actions have been instituted on the basis of charm party and maintenance by political parties who had no chance whatsoever in an election, challenging the outcome of the election on the grounds of exclusion. How does the new act try to deal with that menace that has often been very costly to the electoral process?
The act has removed that grant from the it has four grounds for challenging election petition. So you can no longer challenge an election that you're excluded as a candidate. The provision of the act is that I can't remember the exact number of days before the election, all political parties that believe their fielded candidate will be summoned by INEC to check the sample ballot papers to be used for the election, so that with a view to objecting or raising any observation as to whether they have been excluded or not. So if they refuse to participate in that process, or if they are participating in that process, that would have failed them to make necessary claim as to whether their name and their logo will be on the ballot paper. So that is the window that they have. But if you don't take the opportunity of that provision, you cannot now go to the tribunal to say that election otherwise conducted in a very free and fair manner should be notified on that grant. And I think that is fair enough, and that will ensure that a frivolous claim of exclusion would no longer be the case. I once had a situation, like that, where even people who did not properly fill nomination form, people whose form were not publicized, still went to court. But because of fear of a possible what actual judiciary may take, they used it with respect to extort money even from the winner of the election. And in some cases, there will be collaboration with the losing party to ensure that the election is notified, so that there will be a second bite at the cherry. So in this instance now, it's no longer possible to file petition on the ground of exclusion of a political party.
Okay, Senator Surajuddin Ajibola, Chairman Senate Committee on Media, thank you so much for your contribution to the conversation this morning. We have to let you go. We hear you have another appointment to attend. Thank you so much.
Okay, it's my joy being here today. Thank you.
Back in the studios, Dr. Sharif, what do you think? Do you think, in your own opinion, the provision of the Act itself is a practical response to our electioneering process as we begin to wind down on this conversation?
Yes, of course. Why? Because if you look at critically the explanatory memorandum, encompassing the entire variables, enshrined in the Electoral Act, regulation of the federal, state, area councils, elections, campaign expenses, as well as the criteria for submitting candidate lists, as well as, other variables involved. So you come to understand that the expectation, there is an interlocking process between the judiciary, which goes to the Electoral Offences Commission, as well as the security, operative. Here, now we are seeing a process in which the court, for example, or the commission, one court will say this in terms of litigation, the other will say differently. So there is supposed to be a kind of inter-institutional synergy. A state should have all its institutions interlocking in order to support harmonization of the political journey of that particular state. The media, the judiciary, the political parties, the lawmakers, as well as the executive should all work together towards harmonization of the political processes. But the issue of, looking at those electoral offenses, for example, you see that the Act has actually outlined so many offenses. If you do this, that offense is liable to that. So, but the issue is that the issue of justice delayed is justice denied. In this particular processes, the commission as well as the court should actually, hasten, looking into all sort of cases, as they relate to this particular elections, as well as come up with a verdict that will actually be convincing, to those parties, involved. Then apart from this, we also look at the issue of securitization of the, election, the voting polls, the units, as well. you come to understand that we securitize ballot better than the electorate. You know, in this particular country, when it is time for elections, you see thousands of security operatives deployed. You see each and every polling unit, you have security men guarding, this particular ballot papers. So this is something that we should actually replicate in the larger society. Every region, every state, every local government, every ward, every street, we make sure that this is actually put in place for further political harmonization of our own entity. So that is the interlocking process between the security. Nigeria is very good, at the deployment of security operatives when it is elections. So we should do that, even when it is not time for elections. Then another issue which I would like to re-emphasize on is what, Doctor, the issue of consensus. Politicians in Nigeria are businessmen. Businessmen in the sense that we are investing our resources. Because if you look at members of PDP, members of APC, Labour Party, there is no clear, distinctive ideology, between and among these particular political parties. There is one ideology that is actually there, and what is that? We are investing our resources in order to get more. So if we have consensus democracy, we have indirect democracy, and we have direct democracy. Mr. President had actually looked into this. But what is happening in our own society today? The candidate, and that is why the Electoral Act is saying that before we accept, consensus, we make sure that there is a written document by all identified and cleared aspirants. They write and sign, and they submit that they agree, to allow this candidate to go. But two issues here are that, do they recognize that particular candidate because he is the best in terms of legitimacy, he is the most popular among them, or no? Or no, the party or one candidate among them is tripling what they have spent, in the process of campaign, spending and other things. That is why they are backing up. This is the Nigerian political culture, and this is the Nigerian case. It's not the ideology, it's not the respect they have for the other candidate, choosing by the consensus. It's because something is being multiplied for them, to actually keep that aside. So that is the issue, with that.
And then, Doctor, from practical examples, excuse me, there could be a memorandum of understanding, or as it's been said lately, a memorandum of action for the consensus aspirants to say, okay, we all agree that it will be Sheriff who would go. All four of us would say Sheriff would go. But there must be a quid pro quo. We're not just saying go. If it is governorship, the agreement could be, well, Dr. Akumas will be Commissioner for Finance, Juma will be Commissioner for Works, I will be Commissioner for Rehabilitation or stuff. When you get into office, and you jettison these agreements,
that's where the problem begins.
Dr. Akumas, again, that relates to the whole idea of the behavior of key political actors. Back to the same point we made earlier. Our challenge in Nigeria isn't so much about the existence of rules and regulations. And you can put all of those together and say law. We have the law, but the behavior of actors and the way they treat the law has often been our challenge. No. Well, there's simple things, simple traffic regulation. A notice, a sign properly put there says no parking. That is where you will see
parking.
They will park. Say let them come. No. They leave the vehicle there.
Thank you.
Briefly,
yes.
we're running out of time.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, let me start from the traffic list. I thought I did speak about the issue, one common issue in Abuja that causes accidents. People will see the amber come up, which means that red is coming. They will increase their speed. And even with the red on, they will still continue. Absolutely. And that is one cause of serious accident, and we've been losing lives.
That is where the traffic lights are working.
Yeah, but at least they are working in those places. See, no matter how you look at it, I hope you remember the saying, as expensive as election. Election is expensive. Contest is expensive. If people agree to have somebody based on consensus and there's an understanding, the person gets in there. If he or she doesn't implement that agreement, is that person that will suffer it, because the people will start the fight ahead of time. There is no politician that has come up to contest that doesn't have followers. And they can also cause some serious problems, no matter how minute one may think it is. Whether it is by consensus, by indirect or direct, these are negotiations that always go on. Even if you are going to do direct, you will not be there. You will be at one place. Somebody who is respected and responsible in a ward will represent interest. To do that, there must have been some discussions. How do you take care of my people? So it's the same thing. Whether it's direct, indirect, or otherwise, when you get in there and jettison that understanding and promise, that's where the problem is. Don't forget that Mr. President himself have gone through all these systems. Yeah. The 2019 primaries was by direct. The one before was indirect. So he knows and understands what is on board. So as it is, I did say that what is important for everybody is integrity, is character, and is that public good as the focus. Now, what we need most is that both the government, the clergy, the traditional rulers, everybody, there must be, and this voter education this time will be different. People need to know these aspects of the law now. In churches, in mosques, and we have to pass the message. This is the new electoral law. These are the advantages, these are the disadvantages, these are the do's and these are the don'ts. If we still go ahead and leave it only for the politicians and political parties, it means it is the responsibility of all. It is not for Mr. President or Mr. Governor or just the candidate. It's for everybody, and all hands must be on deck. It's not for INEC. INEC should be busy with how to operate and ensure that these things. But let us all work together towards this.
Dr. Chris Akumas, indeed, all hands have to be on deck. It's a work in progress, and I believe we'll get there someday. Thank you, Dr. Chris Akumas, former Deputy Governor of Abia State. Thank you so much for coming. And good morning, Nigeria. Dr. Sharif Gali Ibrahim, Associate Professor and Head Department of Political Science and International Relations, University of Abuja. Thank you so much, as usual, for coming on Good Morning, Nigeria. We'll take sports now.
All right, let's, we thought we could take the foreign stories. Yes, but all right, that should be, of course, in tomorrow's edition of the program when we are back same time, 7 o'clock in the morning, to look after yourselves. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
And I'm Juma Yusuf. Before we go, don't forget to join NTA in the fight against rape and rapists.